And we're live. Okay. Hello, book lovers. Welcome to the 151st episode of Authors Love Bookstores, broadcasting here on a mighty blaze. I'm your host, Kimberly Hensle Lowrance. Here at Authors Love Bookstores, my co-host, Jill Moldover, and I bring you conversations between authors and their favorite indie booksellers to shine a light on storytelling, creativity, and bookstores, the small businesses that enrich and enliven our community. Since we launched back in 2020, so 3.5 years ago, we have featured bookstores in every U.S. state, plus Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., Canada, and United Kingdom. Today, we are traveling to the great state of Indiana, and let me get right to it and introduce you to our guests. So today we are joined by Angela Jackson Brown. Angela is an award-winning writer, poet, and playwright who is an associate professor in the creative writing program at Indiana University at Bloomington. She also teaches in the graduate program at Spalding University in Louisville, Kentucky. She has published her short fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry in many journals, including the Appalachian Review. And her work has been anthologized in books like Raising the Elegy and Not Like the Rest of Us, an anthology of contemporary Indiana writers. She's also an academic writer and researcher and has written on topics like collaborative teaching, critical service learning, and e-learning. And you can find those publications in the Journal of Black Studies, the Journal of Community Engagement and Higher Education, and others. She's also the author of several novels, including When Stars Rain Down, which received a starred review from Library Journal and glowing reviews from the Alabama Public Library, BuzzFeed, Parade Magazine, Women's Weekly, and many others. I keep putting the in there. I'm sorry, Angela. When Stars Rain Down was also named a finalist for the David J. Langham Senior Prize in American Historical Fiction. She also has a poetry collection called House Repairs, which was awarded the Alabama Author Award in Poetry in 2021. Her latest novel is HOMEWARD, which was published by Harper Muse last month, and we're going to talk about it today. Whew. Whoa.
I'm tired.
So many amazing accomplishments, Angela. Very excited to have you here. And Angela is joined by Jenna Bowman, who is the general manager of Morgenstern Books in Bloomington, Indiana. The store's mission is to nurture connection, encourage learning, and inspire delight. And the store strives to offer opportunities for people to share experiences that help bring forth connection and a sense of unity. Its mission is to envision a world illuminated by the sharing of books, ideas, and understanding. I love that so much. Welcome to you both. We're so excited to have you here on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
So we're going to jump into questions. But before we do that, I just want to remind our audience that if you have questions, we would like to hear them. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can just post a comment below the broadcast and we will get to those questions later on. So, Angela, let's start with you. When we invited you, you immediately said you wanted to talk to Morgenstern Books. So tell us about this bookstore. What's your connection to it? Why is it important to the people of Bloomington, Indiana? And why did you want to have Jenna on the show today?
Absolutely. So thank you first for inviting me. And sure. I absolutely had to invite Morgenstern's Books because I always love independently owned bookstores. Not to say anything against our big bookstores or the others, but I like to know that when I walk into a bookstore that there are people from the community. And so when I moved to Bloomington, when I started teaching at IU, everyone said I had to go there. And when you go into that bookstore, it's like coming home because you're greeted by everyone. They all make you feel like you're the most important person on the planet. And we don't always get that in other bookstores. So I just knew that I had to invite them.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We're very excited that you did recommend the bookstore. Jenna, when in preparing for today's conversation, I was researching the bookstore and it has a very unusual story in that the bookstore existed, then went out of business for 25 years, right, and then reopened. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it came to be and what the store is like now, and maybe how it's different from how it was back the first go around?
Right. So back in the 90s, from 90 to 96-ish, Rick Morgenstern had a bookstore kind of across the street from us now.
Okay.
and it did really well. There were some things that were happening, and the movement of other stores. He expanded a little bit, but then what happened is Borders came in literally right next door to him.
Oh,
And then I don't know if I can say that, Barnes and Noble across the street. And of course, it's a little independent bookstore.
Yeah.
So it took its toll. But fast forward to 2021, 2020-ish, he put a ad out in the paper and said, hey, who's still interested in this? It's still my dream. And some investors came out of the woodwork, and here we are.
wow. An
Yeah.
ad in the newspaper. I have a dream to make this bookstore come alive again. And people stepped forward and said, yes, I want to be part of that.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. How is the bookstore different than when it was back in the first go around in the 90s? Is it the same size? Is it?
Well, okay, so we're Indiana's largest independent bookstore, so the size in itself is something to be seen. And then we have a cafe as well. So those are the easy differences between the two. But I think it's a little bit different now because the genres are richer and deeper.
Yeah.
And the platform is bigger now, I think. And so we're able to dance in that now. As before, it was just independent bookstores were just independent bookstores, and now it's so much more than a bookstore now, and it's not just us. It's pretty much all the independent bookstores out there now.
And where are you in relationship to the university? Are you, having not been to Bloomington, Indiana before, I apologize. Like if I were coming to your store, would I be able to walk to the university? Are students a big population that you see come through your doors?
Absolutely. Students are here pretty much so all day, every day. We open at 8:30 and they are waiting at the door for our cafe tables. Some students walk. There's a bus that stops right outside of our door. It's maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles.
Okay,
from
so
where we're
close.
at. Yeah.
Close enough. Wow,
Yeah.
wonderful. And I imagine if I were to walk through your door, I would see this book sitting on a table right in front.
Actually, today, no, you wouldn't, because I just delivered a bunch to IU, so they're back on reorder. There's a department that took all of mine, which is lovely. But yes, they would be right there on the front table. So
that is a good problem to have the book, have everyone be buying it up. Congratulations, Angela, on HOMEWARD.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
This has been on a whole bunch of must-read lists. I saw it on the Washington Post had it on a must-read list. The Root, it's been on other organizations, have it on like one of the books to read this fall. Booklist calls the book a compelling story about racism, love, community, and the strength it takes to reject a false sense of peace and move forward toward a better future.
Wow.
I really enjoyed spending time with Rose. That's the main character, and her family. I loved her family actually very much. I want to ask you about that. Absolutely. Can you tell our audience a little bit about HOMEWARD for those people who have not yet read it?
Yes. So it is actually the continuation of the story of the family from When Stars Rain Down. It's not a sequel. So a person could read HOMEWARD and feel like they are right where they need to be in terms of knowledge. But it picks up with the daughter of the protagonist from When Stars Rain Down. And Rose comes home with news for her family. She is pregnant with the baby of another man, not her husband. And so she's hoping to come home and escape. But Mama and other family members have a totally different idea. One would think that that might be enough of the story, but I also wanted to highlight the civil rights movement, particularly the year 1963, when we lost so many leaders like Medgar Evers, our President Kennedy. We had the March on Washington. We had the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church, all in a span of about 7 months. And so when I was writing the book, I realized after we did the timetable that, oh, wow, this book is going to come out 60 years after all of those historical events took place. And it was a really sobering thing to be in the process of writing a historical book that so many of the historical events took place in many of our lifetimes. So it was quite the journey. It was emotionally draining at times, but I was so happy that I decided to go back and finish the story of this family.
And I will say, I have not read the When Stars Rain Down, which is the first sort of the other book in this universe.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree with you that I didn't even know until I finished this book about the other story. And now I'm so inspired to go read that one. But you absolutely, for those readers who are sort of tentative, you absolutely can. This is definitely a standalone book.
Yeah, that was very intentional on my part. I always hate, because I'm so bad about even going to Morgenstern's. I'll pick up a book, it sounds good, I get it home, I start reading it, and then I realize, oh wait, this is book 3. I should have already read the other 2 books in order to understand this. So I always decided that even though I was going to write about this fictional world, I was always going to make sure that that book, this book, and then the one in between them, The Light Always Breaks, that all of them would be able to be read separate and also together.
There's an author's note in the book when you talk about that. I hope I got this right, that you would mention these historical events to your students and you would get sort of a blank stare where they kind of weren't events that were totally accessible to them in their immediate memory. Maybe they didn't know so much about this recent past, and that was another inspiration for you to write about that time period. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I knew about these historical events, but I didn't realize until I read your book they all happened in that one year. And I think that's sort of extraordinary how much change and growth and trauma people went through in this very short period of time.
I say we should, any elder that survived that year should be someone that we embrace, because that was trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. Mm-hmm. And you're right. I teach, not only do I teach creative writing, but I also teach African American literature. And I was always shocked at how little so many of my students knew, even about the iconic individuals like Dr. King. I mean, everyone could say, oh yeah, he's the one that preached the I Have a Dream sermon. And maybe there would be one or two would say, oh yeah, I think his last sermon was about a mountaintop or something. But then when I would ask the more, important details, they were all lost. Like, John Lewis, around the time that I was writing this, was still very much alive. Yeah. But very few of my students knew about, what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and that this young 20-something, ran an organization that helped to create the change that allows for me to be in a classroom at Indiana University teaching to them. So in some ways, this is a love letter from me to my students and anyone else who knows a little bit about our history, but maybe not as much as they really should.
Historical fiction, whether it's a book or it's a movie, is such an important companion to the straightforward history class, if you think about it, because maybe we'd be more apt to watch a movie or read a fiction, read a novel, and we can learn in that way than necessarily reading a textbook. There's like power in that storytelling and that kind of storytelling.
The best compliment
as you're talking. Oh, please.
Oh no! I get excited when we talk about history. I was just going to say the best compliments that I ever receive are when people say, "I fact checked you, and it was correct," or I read about John Lewis and I didn't know he did all of those things. So I went and I checked out books, or I went to a bookstore and bought books about John Lewis or about, other members of SNCC who were the students who ran that organization that really helped to create what we know as the civil rights movement of the 1960s.
I'm one of those readers who, whenever I read a book and there's something true, I will go Google it. So I get that. And if you read a book and it's wrong, the book is ruined for you, right? It completely takes you out of the story. So having that foundation of true story, it just inspires people more.
Absolutely. I'm always happy when a historian tells me that they enjoyed what I wrote, because for me, that's the highest compliment. I always thought, initially I thought I might become a history teacher. And then I realized that I enjoyed making up stories about as much as I enjoyed researching real stories. So So that's important to me to get the details as factual as I can. I'm human. Someone might find a mistake, but it won't be because I didn't try very hard to get the information correct.
We're getting some audience questions. And so Katie asks a question I was going to ask, which is, she says, how long did it take you to do the research? And I just wonder if you can tell us a little bit about your research process. How did you begin that? Was there a particular book that was a great resource to you in your writing process?
Thank you so much for that question, Katie. As I am writing one book, I'm always researching another book. So I generally write first thing in the morning, and then in the evenings, I spend that time researching the next project. So it takes me approximately 12 months to a year to write and or research a book. And I will have to say the majority of the research information came from newspaper articles. I read a lot of journals and biographies and autobiographies of some of the civil rights leaders. I went to archives and I looked at journals that were written by just regular people who shared their stories of what it was like to live during those times. I really try to get as close to primary research as possible. I don't particularly like to rely on someone else's opinion of what happened in the past.
Right.
I try to go to that source material and see it for myself. So it can be a difficult process, but I have to shout out my librarians. Without librarians, I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do because they are so knowledgeable and so helpful in terms of making sure that I get access to the best information about the topics I'm writing about.
We also love our booksellers. We love librarians and we love our booksellers. And Jenna, I am curious about how you came to bookselling. So I know that before Morgenstern, you also worked at another bookseller for a while, and you had a background in retail and in other environments. But what is it that called to you about books? And you decided that this is where you want to place your focus?
Yeah, I've always had a love of books. Long story short, I grew up I'm the youngest of five, had a very chaotic home. I was fortunate enough to have a library pretty much across the street from us. So I just kind of hung out there on a regular basis. And our librarians were amazing. I couldn't imagine. I always thought how smart they were because every time they just had books, they were like forever giving you books to read and everything. But then I got into retail and I went into a couple different like clothing retail directions, and I just kind of stuck with retail. And then I found myself back with an author back in San Antonio, Texas. And I'm like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I haven't looked back.
What advice would you give someone who is thinking about becoming a bookseller? What's the thing you wish you had known back in the beginning of that path for you?
I don't know. I feel like if they wanted to go into the book world in itself, it's to me, it's a relatively safe place because books don't really, they're there, trends of clothes and shoes and what have you, it changes and it's never, stable. But, the same book that you read, people read in the 1700s are still being sold today. It's a constant. That's the common denominator, I think, between generations is the books that we leave behind.
The common denominator between generations are the books we leave behind. Oh, I like that. What's your, so I heard an interview you did when you said that you're sort of the putter-outer of fires.
Yeah.
At the bookstore, which is actually, I think your official title is general manager, but you're the putter-outer of fires.
Yeah.
Okay, right. But do you still get the opportunity to walk the floor and hand sell books?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I will tell you, my booksellers are terrified when I come out on the floor, though, because I change things on a custom basis. So I'm like, let's do this, let's do that, But no, it kind of gives me a moment of clarity when I can just walk out of the office and go somewhere else and just
kind of get away from the fires that need to be put out. Yeah.
Breathe in the lovely scent of the books that are out there. So.
And do you get in your role, are you in a position where you influence the curation of the books, like what books are in the store? And so what's a popular genre? Is there one genre that's very popular at your store versus another?
Oh, mercy. Right now, everything is rom-com. Everything is rom-com. It's so crazy. I'd say, 10 years ago, not even 10 years ago, but it was, like psychological thrillers and rom-coms are it now. And that's all because of TikTok. TikTok has exploded and has given voice to so many authors that probably wouldn't have had a voice. It's lovely. It's kind of fun to watch.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Angela, you're on TikTok. I think I've seen some TikTok videos. We'll put a link below for people to go follow you on TikTok. What made you decide to get on TikTok? Because there's a lot of authors who just reject social media. It's too much. But what made you decide to embrace it?
So Kimberly, I've always wanted to be an actress. I just can't remember lines. So there's that. But my publisher, Harper Muse, they kept saying, "Oh, you should get on TikTok." And I always said, well, if I have something to say, I'll go on TikTok. Or if I can come up with a funny angle, I'll go on TikTok. But I'm not trying to become TikTok famous. So you might see a TikTok from me today, and it might be a month before you see another one. But what I found is that it's kind of fun. I can dial into my inner, Lucy and funny moments and just do silly things. So I'm kind of enjoying it.
Well, we all need outlets, don't we? For a little serious. The world is very serious. So it's good to have places where we can shine in different ways.
And I actually had one person say to me, he was at an event. He said, "I'm at your event because I saw your video on TikTok. I looked you up to see what you were doing, and I saw you were going to be here, so I'm here." So I said, "Okay, I guess it does work."
There you go.
Yeah,
I love that. One of the questions I wanted to ask you about HOMEWARD is, you have many real people who are in this book. We mentioned John Lewis, Dr. King. There are other real people who had a role in SNCC and in the civil rights movement. And I wondered, as a writer of fiction, how do you approach including these real people in your story? What responsibility did you feel you have? Was it scary to do that? I don't know. I guess there's a beautiful scene with Dr. King giving a sermon, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and the sermon. And I'm just curious how an author approaches including these people who are well known and have a full and rich history in their own work. And how did you approach that?
Yes, it is. It's a challenge, obviously, because I want to present them in a way that feels authentic. I never want to put words in their mouths that don't sound like things they would actually say. I don't want to have them doing things that would be out of character. So it involves, not just researching the time, but researching the people. So even if I had a character who was there for just a moment, I probably spent weeks and weeks digging into any diaries or journals or articles or books that they wrote about themselves to really try to hone in on the real person. When I was ready to write the Dr. King section, I wanted to use an actual sermon from Dr. King, but we learned that financially we would not be able to afford it. So I spent, again, weeks and months studying his sermons. So the sermon that you see that Dr. King preaches in my book, I wrote that sermon. And it was really, listening to him, trying to find the cadence of how he spoke, thematically trying to look at the things he was most passionate about and trying to infuse that into the sermon for that particular Sunday. In fact, I researched his schedule to make sure he could be available at my fictional church on that particular Sunday.
Wow.
So I go way in with my research.
I love that. That's a wonderful. It feels, when you read it, when I read your author's note I read an interview, I read that you had done that. I thought I had to go back and reread it because I really thought it was his sermon. I felt like you captured his voice beautifully.
Well, and I'll say this, I would not have felt confident enough to do that with my first book or even my second book. It really has been a process to get to the point where I feel like I can approximate all of these historical figures.
Mm.
So it's a journey. And there's a lot of characters that I want to write about, but I don't yet feel confident enough to try to get into their persona yet. But yeah, it's a process.
We have a question for you from Jody, and it's 2 parts. It's a long one. Okay, here's the first part. Jody says, a few years ago, you wrote, first I outlined the basic structure of the book, breaking it up into 3 acts, similar to a play. Then I divide each act into chapters. Once I know my story arc and what I am going to focus on in each chapter, I develop a research list for each chapter, the things I have to know in order to write the chapter. Is this still the method you tend to adhere to?
First, I have to say, Jody Lisberger is an amazing writer and was one of my teachers when I was at Spalding. Mm-hmm. So thank you for tuning in, Jody. And yes, Jody, I still use that same method. It worked back when I was a student with you, and it still works now. There's very little that I change in terms of my process. My process is one that I feel comfortable with. Because I'm also a playwright, the 3-act structure really works mentally in terms of how I see a story unfold.
Yeah.
And I do a chapter by chapter outline because I have books coming out almost every year. And for me to stay on track, I have to have a plan. I can't just sit down and hope for the best. I have to know where I'm going every day when I sit down, whether it's 15 minutes, an hour, or 8 hours. As long as I have that plan, I know I'll stay on track.
Mm-hmm. And wow, that's wonderful. And so the book doesn't change. Have you ever sat down and been like, maybe this, I was wrong, it needs to be this?
I might change a few things. I say it's sort of like, how you have your GPS and it tells you how to get from point A to point B. And you might decide, oh, wait, there's an ice cream parlor. I'm going to take that. So I might take some exits, but I always get right back on the road again and keep heading down the highway. So no, but think of it. I've been working on that outline for 9 months to a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So by the time I get to the end of that process, I've pretty much worked out all the kinks in terms of the story. So really, it's just a matter of writing it.
I love that. I think, doesn't the GPS say something like recalculating? It's like recalculating.
And I have to do that sometimes. Yeah. And the thing that it does allow for, and I won't give away too many details from HOMEWARD, but there are really tragic things that happen in this book. And the only way that I'm able to go through with those things is because I have a contract with myself, which is my outline. Because I fall in love with these characters. Yeah. I don't want to see bad things happen to them. So it's in my impulse to save them from themselves. But I recognize that I've got to stick to the story because the story works the way I envision it.
I love that. Yeah.
Right?
I think that when reading a book, I don't read a whole lot of fiction, but when I do, I have a tendency to mourn the characters after the book is done. Mm-hmm. And so, to know that, like even the author's heart and soul, feels the same pain, with that. So that's a lovely way to look at it.
Absolutely. They're real to me. I mean, to the readers, I hope they become real to them. But to me, these are real people, especially since I've been working on this book working on these characters since the 2000s. Yeah. They started out as short stories and then became novels. So I've done other projects in between, but there's really been no time in maybe the last, 16, 17 years that I didn't have these folks on my mind. So yeah, they're part of my family for sure.
Oh, I love that. I love characters that you randomly think about them. You're taking out the trash, emptying the dishwasher, and you're just kind of like a character pops into your brain and you wonder how they are. Like that's the best kind of. Yeah. And I feel like these characters in this book are people you're kind of wondering, like, what would Rose think about the world in 2023? Like, because she'd be in her 60s. Like, what would she think about? Like, that's a good character. And I should tell our audience now, in the spirit of full disclosure, this book will make you cry. I may have been
all
sobbing.
feels.
Yeah, all the feels.
All the feels.
Especially page 98. You may just be crying.
Now I'm going to go to page 98. What did I do there?
Oh, you'll know when you get there. In the best possible way, because you're invested in the characters and you care about them and what they're experiencing. You feel their sadness and their joy.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Jenna, one of the things we love about indie bookstores, other than the books and the people who work there, are all of the events that bookstores have. So I know Angela has been there. You've had other authors, and think about the years you've worked in bookselling. Mm-hmm. What's your favorite author event that comes to your mind? Like the kookiest, or the happiest, or the weirdest? Like what's the one you tell at dinner parties? Like, oh, this happened. Do you have one of those?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Recently, my favorite, he's here in Bloomington as well. Ross Gay, he comes into the store and he's the most beautiful soul. And he's present. It's just amazing to speak with him. And you just know he's present, even if it's a quick little hi and goodbye, he stops and it's great. So, he's one of a kind. We lived in Nashville, Tennessee, so we worked at a bigger store there. Mercy, we had events from Rob Zombie to Joel Osteen to Charlie Daniels to Karen Kingsbury. So it's all over the place. And I think that I don't know. I think that the hometown heroes are like the best because they're just committed to where they are. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but I feel like when you're on your own territory, I think you're a little bit more relaxed to be yourself. So it's kind of nice to see that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, and I'm kind of perfect segue, about the literary community in Indiana, because you have the universities, you have many authors in the community. Is it a supportive community? Is it a large community? Angela's nodding. Like, what is the connection you have with other writers and creators and poets and playwrights? How is that fostered, and how do people find one another and connect?
Oh my goodness. It is probably the most, giving community in terms of authors supporting other authors. We have an amazing award, the Indiana Authors Award, that recognizes the work that we do. And those individuals, they don't just give you an award and send you on your way. They are constantly feeding into you. They're helping libraries and schools who maybe can't afford to have an author come and visit. They help you to go and visit with school children who want to be writers and adults. I just recently did an event at a public library due to the Indiana Authors Award. So there's that. And then the university communities, even though we're all very loyal to the places that we teach, we still go to other universities within Indiana and speak to students and, give back. So it's an amazing community. The MFA program at IU that I teach in, it's bar none, nothing, I can't imagine any better in terms of there's no one with big egos. You talked about Ross. Ross is that same Ross, whether he's at a bookstore, at a faculty meeting, or, teaching students. And the same can be true for my other colleagues, Brando Skyhorse, Kathy Bowman, Bob Bledsoe. I mean, everybody is dedicated to their craft, but they're also dedicated to uplifting the literary community in Indiana.
Wonderful. Jenna, what's the store's role in all of this? Do you have an Indiana Authors series? I know I can find a section of your store, I'm sure, dedicated to local authors. But what kind of role does the bookstore have in supporting these writers?
Oh, mercy. Well, when we first opened our doors to the public, we didn't know what it was going to look like. We were open to just letting it organically form. And especially IU and all the other departments, they have loved on us so well and have come, and presented their books. And of course, we're like, yes, yes, and yes. That's part of our missions and values is to be a platform. And it's just grown so much since then. So like we do a lot of tabling for a lot of the departments at Indiana University, and we will not say no, even the most unknown author to the biggest author, just because we just want to be linking arms with the community over there at the university is just amazing. And Angela's right. I mean, you see every department here represented with most of the author events that we have going on. It's not just a cliquey thing. I mean, just they're here and they show up, and I'm happy to be that place.
Wonderful. Angela, one of the things I loved about HOMEWARD, okay, there's many things, but one of the things I loved was Rose and her family. I love this family, this tight-knit, loving family where everyone's in everyone else's business and everyone has an opinion, and it could be annoying, but it's really based in great love. And I love how strict her parents are and demanding. As a parent myself, I loved that. And I found that the character arc, Rose's arc in this book, there's a lot of growth that she goes through. And I felt like her family also went through a lot of growth as well. They went from, well, I don't want to say what they went. I'll just say they had growth. I don't want to have any spoilers, but they grew a lot. Perhaps they learned to trust their children's voices in a way that they hadn't before. I found that to be really beautiful, their close connection and the way the family was depicted. And I wondered if that was a specific goal of yours when you sat down and you did all this beautiful outlining. Was that something that you intentionally want to show, was this family and their growth as well as Rose's growth?
Yes, partly I was seeing the growth from the 1930s when Stars Rain Down was set, all the way to 1963, 64 when this book was set. And I wanted to be able to illustrate a number of things. And I will disclose this part just because, when we think about the civil rights movement, we often think that everyone, especially from the Black community, was involved, that it was something that everyone supported. And what I wanted to be able to illustrate in this book is that people were all over the place when it came to the work that Dr. King and John Lewis and the other young people were doing. They felt that they were stirring up a hornet's nest, that they were moving too fast, that maybe this wasn't the right time. And I wanted to illustrate that there were some very good people who were just afraid. Mm-hmm. They were afraid of the potential loss. They were afraid specifically for their children and what it would mean for them to work in the civil rights movement. So I did want to show that journey through this family because I thought they were a good spokesperson for how everybody was all over the place. And in any given family, you might have 5 or 10 different points of view as to how Black people should fight for their rights.
Yeah. And also one of the things you also do was really beautiful was there are multiple generations of the family. And so you saw the different decision making that each generation went through. So I thought that was also a really beautiful part of the book. Yeah. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you've put together a course syllabus. So there's a book club guide. So if you're watching and your book club's looking for a book, this is actually an excellent choice. And Angela, you've developed a book club list, a whole questions, and we'll put a link to that. But you've also developed a course syllabus, which should not be surprising considering your amazing background. And you have a number of readings for people to read along with the book. And we'll put a link to that below because that is an excellent resource. I have not seen that before. What inspired you to do that? That's a professor in you, the teacher, I'm sure.
As a teacher, sometimes I struggle. I'll find a book that I really like, and then I'll struggle to think about, okay, so what would this look like in a course? And then once it's in the course, what other books would I pair with it? What other readings would I suggest my students to read? And so I thought, well, let me make this easier for my fellow colleagues in the field and give them some ideas of ways this book can be used in the classroom. I see this as commercial fiction, most definitely, but I also see it as the type of book that crosses over and could potentially cross over into academia because of the various things that I write about and the subject matter I talk about. So I could see a historian using this book. I could see a literature class using this book. And in fact, there are a few teachers and scholars that have reached out to me and said they plan on using the book, and they thanked me for the syllabus. So,
excellent.
So there you go.
Excellent. Excellent. So one of the things I'm always, again, the link to that is below for people to check it out. And it's good for classrooms, but also just for readers who are curious to know more. One of the things I'm always fascinated about when we have authors and booksellers on the show is what kind of a reader you were as a child. So when you think about your early years as a reader, or maybe your teen years, what was the book or books that really caught your interest? Was there an author where you were an author you were obsessed with? Did you read fantasy? Did you read the rom-coms that are so popular now? Or did you read historical fiction? What was it when you look back on those early days of reading? Jenna, what was it for you? Was there an author that you adored?
When I was in school, in elementary school, we went straight for the choose your own adventure books.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a big deal. But then I think I started reading, I did the whole series of, Little House on the Prairie, it was a big thing growing up, and I did that. But then I remember one Saturday, when, you'd only see cartoons on Saturdays at the time. And I think I stumbled upon a weird rendition of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, which introduced me at a very young age to C.S. Lewis. And after I found the books as a hook, line, and sinker, which went into kind of the Lord of the Rings. But then I took a swift turn to nonfiction, and I love history and biography and science books. So, yeah.
Angela, what about you?
Oh my goodness, definitely the Little House on the Prairie books. Those were the first books that I felt I can remember falling in love with. Charlotte's Web. I cried so many tears over that book. Sounder was another book. But I will say the first book I ever read by a Black person was Maya Angelou's book. And up until third grade, I didn't know Black people wrote books. I'd only read books by white authors. And so when I discovered that book through my third grade teacher, who's a Black woman, Mrs. Kennedy, it just opened up the possibility for me, because I thought, wow, if this Black woman who's just written these amazing stories, if she can do it, maybe I can do it too.
Oh, teachers. So important to inspire a different version of ourselves. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
Thank you for sharing those. I'm curious what you're reading now. Our audience always loves to hear book recommendations from our booksellers or authors. So what's on your bedside table, or what are you looking forward to reading, or what's a recent book that you've read that you'd love to recommend? After, of course, everyone reads HOMEWARD, and we're putting all the links to purchase HOMEWARD and all of Angela's books, actually, from Morgenstern. They're below in the comments. Jenna, what are you reading or what are you recommending these days?
I just finished a biography. Her name's Brittany Means, Hell If We Don't Change Our Ways. Amazing. I did an author talk with her. That is not an easy book to read, but it was great. I just came back from a conference in Detroit, and I got to meet Percival Everett. Yeah. And so he's got a new book coming out next year, which I have been gifted a copy, and it's called James, which is one of the characters from, way back when in the old classics. I'm pretty excited about reading that. And then, of course, there's another one, Frida Love Smith, I Quit Everything. Those are my three that I targeted. So.
Oh, Frida is on the show next month. We're having her on the show.
Yeah, she was just in the store. She's lovely.
Yeah, we're excited to have her on. And then the James book, the Percival Everett, that's a retelling of Huckleberry Finn.
Through James. Yeah.
And we've heard you're the second bookseller to recommend that, actually.
Oh, I can't wait to get my hands on it. Yeah.
That means it's going to be, and you have your hands on it too. So, okay, that's even better. So we know it's going to be a hot book.
Yeah.
Angela, what about you?
I have to shout out Brittany, who was a student of mine. I'll tell you, there's 6 degrees of separation.
Oh, my word.
Everybody in Indiana, we all know each other one way or another.
Yeah.
So I am listening to a book and I'm reading a book. So I am listening to Nana Reed Dew's newest book, The Reformatory. I'm listening to it because the person who did the audio narration for my book, Jonice Abbott Pratt, also did the narration for this book. So it's like hearing my old friend's voice reading me a bedtime story. So I'm listening to that one. But I'm also reading Lisa C's newest book, Lady Tan's Circle of Women. And I have read everything that she has ever written. And I love her research. If you read the back of her book and look at the level of research she does, she puts me to shame because she goes in. So I love her work just because I know how well researched everything is, as well as Tanana Reduce, because she did a lot of work to write this book.
Excellent. Thank you for those recommendations. We're putting links below. Again, links to HOMEWARD as well. And we have a whole bunch of audience questions. So I know we're running a little bit over time, but let me see. Okay. Jody has another question. Jody, and there's also a comment from Jody where she apologizes for asking questions. Jody, please don't. We love your questions. Jody asking another question. So she asks, which of your characters was hardest to write and why? Oh, that's a good question. Thank you, Jody.
I would say Rose was the most difficult character for me to write in this book. In fact, she wasn't, I had decided that she was not going to be my protagonist, that I was going to write it from the point of view of her sister. Well, first her mother and then her sister. And then somehow or another, I kept coming back to her. I think because of the choices she made initially, I had a hard time having empathy for her.
Yeah.
But as I really started thinking about the possibility for change, and that of all the characters, I felt like she had the greatest possibility for change. So when I sat down and started just outlining and thinking about her story, I thought, okay, I can live with her through this book because I see how she can evolve as a character.
We also have an audience question asking about other events you're doing. And I just want to encourage people to check out your website. We're including the link below to both Angela's website and the store website. So you can see about events at the store, other events Angela's doing. Both Angela and the store have newsletters you can sign up for and social media links. We'll put them all below, so check those out. Katie has another question. She asks, what did you learn about yourself after writing HOMEWARD?
Oh my goodness. I guess what I learned was that just from the standpoint of a writer, I learned that there was nothing that I couldn't figure out. You know, in terms of the historical details, so many of them were not easy to track down, and also writing scenes that were so foreign to me. Like I have a Jewish character in my book, and I know absolutely zero about the Jewish religion. And I was so terrified of getting it wrong. And I didn't want to ever offend any of my Jewish friends or readers. And so I labored very hard over those sections, like just Shabbat, and making sure that I didn't have anything that didn't feel natural. So I had a lot of readers who I trust. I reached out to several rabbis to ask questions, so I'm very grateful to them for the insight they gave me and books they suggested. So yeah, just knowing that almost everything we need to know is in a book or it's on the internet, or better yet, there's someone out there that you can ask those questions of, and they'll have the answers.
Wonderful. Katie goes on to comment that she just ordered your book. So thank you, Katie. And then Randy has written a couple of comments, and he just wants to tell you, what does he say? I love that your book is also academic. I ordered a signed copy from an indie bookseller where you did a signing. I printed out the syllabus and the book club guide, and I'm thrilled that you were a teacher. I'm totally going to study your books. And he goes on to say that he's a student at Empire State University, and he's currently studying history and slavery among the founders in revolutionary America.
That's wonderful, Randy. I'm working on a book now. I'm not sure if it'll be I have one coming out next year or the year after, so it could be a couple of years down the line, but I'm working on a book that's set slightly before the Civil War. So I might have to reach out to you for some information.
Excellent. So Jenna, our last question always goes to the bookseller. Even though I very much could talk to the two of you forever, I should let you go back to your own lives. So we always want to ask our booksellers, please finish this sentence for us. Running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
I'm going to say community.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's the core of our store. So for Morgenstern's, that's 100% true.
I can see that in the way that both of you spoke about the store and in the environment in which writers flourish and readers find books to read. Very much feels like you have that in Bloomington and in Indiana.
Yes, very grateful. Very grateful.
Thank you both so much for making time to be with us today on Authors Love Bookstores.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So again, everyone, we're putting links to HOMEWARD and all of Angela's books from Morgenstern below. I mean, I don't know about you, but my daughter has a countdown to Christmas on her phone and reminds me that it's like 6 weeks away. And there are many other holidays that happen between now and the end of the year. It's not just Christmas, obviously, but many opportunities to give gifts to yourself and loved ones. And books are always the best gifts. And here's a great one that would look perfect wrapped up with a bow. So check it out below. And I'm sure that you could buy it from Morgenstern and Angela could sign it for you, or for the person you want to give the book to. So definitely check that out. Thank you everyone for being with us today. To our audience, if you liked today's show, and we certainly hope that you did, please go over to A Mighty Blaze on Facebook to get notified about all of our other events, or follow us on YouTube. You can watch every episode that we've done for the past 3.5 years. You can also sign up for our newsletter on amightyblaze.com to hear about everything that's upcoming. This show, Authors Love Bookstores, will be back next Wednesday, November 15th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll welcome author Lauren J.A. Bear, who will be talking with us about her debut novel, Medusa's Sisters. We hope you'll see you then. And of course, Jenna and Angela, thank you. And to everyone, until we meet again, please be well. And of course, keep reading. Bye, everyone.